Hey everybody, it's Mike Cadieux from Procurement Foundry. We've got a great panel webinar discussion for you today with some amazing guests. I'm just going to take a couple of seconds. Tons of people already flying into the Zoom room. As you know, we've got Zoom room live studio audience here for you. And at the same time, we also try to do LinkedIn Live. So I am just double checking and making sure that, that we can actually connect to LinkedIn, which seems to be having a trouble right now, of course, because we're live. So of course we're going to have trouble with LinkedIn Live. Let me just make sure that we've got LinkedIn pulling for us. We're definitely on Twitter, so that's great news. Okay, it looks like we're on LinkedIn Live as well. So I'm going to refresh my LinkedIn Live. We got a whole bunch of people. I was blasting out on LinkedIn Live this morning, telling everybody to come to us who hadn't registered. So anyway, super excited about today. Thank you all for joining us. Wow, almost 70 people in the room already. That's really exciting. We are talking about vendor data, vendor relationship management services. We've got the folks from apexanalytix here, which are one of the big sponsors of Procurement Foundry. We've got Amy Platis here from Northwestern Medicine, who's a subject matter expert in this and has gone through an actual deployment and is in the process of evolving her vendor relationships. And she's going to talk a ton about that and the value proposition that she's had in elevating her game associated with her vendors and turning them into strategic partners in that space. So without further ado, let me introduce you. I'm going to give a little bit of housekeeping just so that you all understand. I apologize in advance for my raspy voice. For those of you who don't know, my son was in a football match this weekend, and I completely lost my mind in the stands and then lost my voice. So hence the onset laryngitis. I got a cup of tea and a lot of honey here, so I hopefully will get through this. But a little bit of housekeeping. So you're inside of the 75 people that are here inside of Zoom. We would love your participation in this. We want to hear from you. We've got a poll at the end to ask you some quick questions at the end. We also are very interested in your questions. As always, we have chat open for you. So if you want to chat and say hello, please feel free to chat and say hello. At the bottom is the Q&A module. Please put your questions for Amy and Akhilesh into the Q&A module so that we can actually read them and get them in. As you know, I do not like to keep Q&A until the end. I love to make this interactive and on the fly. Not only will we be taking Q&A from inside of the room, we'll also be taking Q&A from inside of Linked at the same time. So we will be monitoring LinkedIn while we're monitoring this room at the same time. This is live. It is on LinkedIn. It will be part of our permanent record on LinkedIn. So if for some of you have to leave, you can come back and watch it on LinkedIn later as well. And obviously, Akhilesh and the team at apexanalytix, they're very excited about being able to spread that across LinkedIn and the rest of the multiverse. I watched Spider-Man last night, so I apologize. So that said, let me introduce the folks for today. Amy from Platis. Akhilesh, I think we've got something perfect. Thank you so much. Akhilesh's work is doubling today as AV coordinator and as a guest on the panel. So thank you, Akhilesh. So Amy from Northwestern Medicine, Akhilesh again from Apex. Tell us a little bit about yourself. You know I love to let you introduce yourself. So Amy, tell us a little bit about yourself, what your role is, what you do, Northwestern Medicine as well. That'd be great.
Thank you, Mike. Good afternoon. So my name is Amy Platis. I'm the Program Director of Finance here at Northwestern Medicine. So I manage all of the accounts payable functions, T&E, our payment programs, as well as our supplier portal and supplier maintenance and onboarding. A little background on Northwestern Medicine. So we're a large healthcare provider here in Illinois. We have over 30,000 employees, more than 4,000 physicians, and we just are in the process of integrating our 11th hospital, and we have hundreds of physicians' offices throughout the Chicagoland region.
That's great. Thank you so much, Amy. Really appreciate it. Akhilesh, I think you've got some information about Apex as well. Tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, a little bit about Apex as well. I know we're going to get deep into this later on, but maybe just a couple of seconds on yourself and the company would be great.
Thank you, Mike. I'm Akhilesh Agarwal. I'm Senior Vice President for our Apex Portal Solutions Division, as well as the CIO for the company. Here at Apex, we have a variety of solutions that we offer. One of them is Apex Recovery, where we recover and prevent over $3 billion on an annual basis. We use First Strike as the platform to prevent those overpayments from going out. But historically, if you have those overpayments already done, then the Apex Recovery service helps you with that effort. We have an Apex portal, and Apex portal is basically the solution that offers supplier risk management, supplier onboarding, registration, dynamic discounting, and so on. We'll be talking a lot more about this platform in detail as the session goes on. And then we also have a Smart VM Golden Record database, which comprises of more than 32 million records of suppliers on a global basis. We cover 98+% commercially spoken languages worldwide, and we have over 10 million supplier communications on an annual basis. So that's a little bit about Apex, and would love to talk more as we go along. Mike, you're on mute, I think.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to make sure that as I cough, and I don't upset everybody and they have to listen to this annoying raspy voice. But thank you so much. Really appreciate the overview. Thank you, Amy, for telling us a little bit about yourself and about the company. Let's jump right in. So, Amy, tell me a little bit. I want to go through a natural transition of conversation here around where you were, some of the decision processes, how you chose apexanalytix to help you with your vendor items, and then a little bit about deployment, and then also maybe a little bit more about just what's available on this product set. There is a ton available. I got to be honest with you, I was completely shocked during the pre-discussions when Akhilesh started telling me all of the different things that are inside of apexanalytix. I was like, wow, I didn't realize it was the full, so a little bit of shock and awe for me, which is great. I don't get very easily excited about things. So when I do, it's usually like, wow, I haven't seen something like this. So Amy, tell me a little bit about where you were at the beginning of this. I know you've been on this journey for about 4 years now. Tell me a little bit about where you were before you started this whole process. What were your systems like? What was your vendor data like? What was your vendor onboarding data, onboarding process like? All of those things.
Sure. So I came on board at Northwestern about 5 years ago. And when I came on, I was brought on because we had gone through a major integration. So our healthcare system had essentially doubled overnight with that very large integration. And it had really brought to light some pain points, some of them that were brought on by the integration and some of them that were legacy that were just really perpetuated by such a large growth in such a short amount of time. So when I came on, I was taking a look through all of the accounts payable functions and our procure-to-pay issues that we were having, match exceptions with purchase orders. We had a lot of issues with multiple accounts, multiple remittance advices, different payment methods, cash application issues, just a lot of downstream impacts that as we started to really dig into the root cause of these errors, we found that a lot of it was being driven from the fact that we had either inaccurate supplier data or woefully underpopulated data or duplicate suppliers loaded in our system. So there was a lot of cleanup that needed to be done to our supplier master file to really get in sync with our suppliers, as well as get more up-to-date information. Many of our suppliers have been suppliers for 50 years. So things had drastically changed in our suppliers world without us necessarily having line of sight of those changes. So through that cleanup process, we identified that there were things that we needed to change from a process perspective, but also a tools perspective. So we had identified that at that time we had our procurement team was loading suppliers into our ERP system as well as accounts payable. and they both had a different way about going about loading those suppliers. There was a lot of crossover of what suppliers they would say, accounts payable would put in and purchasing or procurement would put in. And really just, it was a very flat process. We were getting, a flat PDF document with a W-9, minimal information. Many times that information, there was no way for us to validate, was it being filled out by the supplier themselves or by the business owner? Not having really good same time validations to places like the IRS and OFAC, all of that
Right.
real time. So that's what led us to the journey of saying, okay, let's first let's put it all into one team. So we created the vendor master team, which falls under me, so that we had at least that synergy and could control the process. But then really going down the RFP process of digging into what would be a good registration module so that we had a tool that could give us a consistent data source feeding into our ERP. So a lot of the issues that were being caused by just the way people would key something in, we were able to standardize it and really look at a tool that not just had a registration module, but that had the ability to do customizations so that it could meet our business needs, not just a straight out of the box, which had some of those we looked at had very minimal registration information and wasn't as detailed as we would have liked. So that's what really started us down our journey and led us to Apex. Apex was one of several companies that we did the RFP with. And they had multiple things that really drove the decision in their favor. The first would be that, like I said, it had the ability to do customization to the registration module. We're in healthcare, we're in a highly regulated field.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, right? You're talking highly regulated, highly regulatory. You've got to be real careful about your vendor data. You're going to be real careful about, operating on a global or even a national scale associated with identifiable information, records, all of those things, right?
Absolutely. We need to make sure that we are properly vetting our suppliers, making sure that, that we are able to identify any of our suppliers who might access any of our information systems, that might access any of our data, which could contain personal healthcare information or personal individual information, so such as our HR databases and our employee data. So making sure that we could identify the type of business all of our suppliers were doing, the type of access them or any of their POIs that could come on board would have, and then making sure that if they had access, they had the proper, IT documents or SOC 2, proper contracts, business associates agreement, different contractual language to make sure that they've been reviewed by our Office of General Counsel, our IT security department, our corporate compliance department. So it really gave us the ability to get that information and also have it reviewed and approved by the business owners, which are the subject matter experts to those risks.
Yeah. Wow, I got to tell you, you're answering questions before I even ask them. It's fantastic. I love it. I was going to ask a question around what made you decide to do this. Obviously, it's optimization, it's less cycles, it's better data, it's cleaner data, it's helping your vendor population actually get the right information in, cleaning up regulatory requirements, all of those amazing things. Just curious, when you started this whole process, who were some of the key stakeholders inside of your organization that you really had to marshal to get behind this thing?
Well, first of all, I'll say that I'm very lucky that here at Northwestern, both our Chief Procurement Officer and our CFO, they're very innovative. So they, having senior leadership and really believing in and driving us to continually optimize our entire procure-to-pay system really helped to get the adoption from all the key stakeholders. So definitely senior leadership being fully engaged helped us move through this project much faster than if they had been a barrier. There's also a lot of collaboration up and down the work stream. So of course there's the finance department, IT. IT is a major factor in a change such as this. There's our purchasing department. There's our, like I said, our Office of General Counsel, our IT security team, our corporate compliance team. So there's multiple stakeholders that had a voice in what information we needed to put together a registration module that met the needs of the entire system, not just one department. So there's a difference between the information I need just to load to be able to pay somebody through accounts payable and the robust data that we need to be able to fully vet and do business at a higher level with our suppliers.
Great. So I want to jump for a quick section over to Akhilesh, and because Amy, thank you for that amazing information, by the way. And I love the fact, I mean, listen, we're all procurement and supply chain people. We probably the number one thing we don't do very well at the beginning is to marshal the resources and consensus around making big decisions, right? This is a situation where very, very rarely does procurement actually buy something for procurement operations. Typically, we're buying things for everybody else. And then when we want to buy something for ourselves, it's like, yeah, no, here's an abacus and a chisel and a stone. Let's see if you can work with that, right? So for us to be the people who are finally asking for tools around budgetary requirements, marshaling those resources and those inside stakeholders and getting their time to actually help us to get better is a big ask, right?
Yeah, that's where your senior leadership, again, our chief procurement officer and our CFO, they really embraced us going down this path and really, challenged us to find a solution that was great for the organization. So their leadership and partnership and support was huge.
Fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about what Amy just kind of ran through, right? She kind of gave us the backdrop on where she was and who she had to get involved to start making the decision process around selection process and what she needed to get accomplished. Is this typical inside of organizations that you engage with? I mean, listen, Northwestern Medicine isn't a small operation, right? And inside of the Procurement Foundry, our membership, we've got, half of our membership represent multi-billion-dollar companies. What are you seeing in your engagements associated with vendor management maturity models, things like that? I mean, how many people are tracking this stuff in Excel and should really need to go to intelligence systems now?
Yeah, so when we started the journey within Apex years ago, and I used to think we live in a digital age, that I was so awfully wrong, especially in that front, because whenever we talk to prospects, clients, etc., it has been, for the most part, a lot of manual intervention in supplier onboarding, especially. And even if there is a system in place, like Amy described, it doesn't do everything or is not customized enough to do what each procurement department in every company is trying to do. And therefore, and a lot of outside the system effort goes in, a lot of time, manual labor, and so on and so forth. What I'm also finding is not every company is the same. So every company is unique. How you can onboard a vendor, I've just learned over the period of years, hundreds of ways how to onboard a vendor, right? So
probably as many ways as there are vendors, to be honest with you.
Correct, right? So that's also part of our journey, and in doing so, what we soon found ourselves in a situation was, look, if we try to build a software which is going to be customized or coded to every client, that's never going to work out. So we had to really go and think about how are we going to architect our system so that it's highly configurable and adaptable to various business domains.
Yeah, that's great insight. Thank you. I want to start to talk a little bit about the engagement in the deployment process, right? I know a lot of us, when we kind of dissect these I don't know, I'll call this a video case study, right? I don't know what that, I don't know. I think we're coming up with new ground here. Let's talk a little bit about deployment. If I can go back, Amy, with you back into 4 years ago and how this all started to go about. I know that you selected a certain number of modules against the fleet of products that were available to you. And thanks, Akhilesh, for putting that up on the screen for us. Let's talk a little bit about the deployment. So I know a lot, I've been through a lot of technology deployments, right? And a lot of nothing ever goes perfect, right? But for some cases where things don't go perfect, there are some hiccups, there are some, you know, timelines tend to get bumped, right? Because you never really get the timeline right. But at the same time, sometimes you're like, oh, geez, it doesn't do exactly what I want it to do, but I'm 80% of the way there and I'm happy with where it's at right now. But then there's always that one moment in the deployment for me around new technology where I go, wow, I didn't even realize this thing could do this. I'm really super excited that we actually got this functionality out, right? So talk to me a little bit about the deployment process. And what were some of the challenges? I don't know, Amy, if you could think back to that, and Akhilesh, you could talk a little bit about some of the typical challenges associated with the deployment. I mean, I'm guessing on your side from a vendor perspective and from a supplier perspective, it's always about getting resources at the client level to commit to the project plan, right? So Amy, maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the challenges on your side, and Akhilesh, you can as well.
Sure. So, you know, I've launched many IT projects as well. And this one was different than any other. And one of the things that was different about it was at the onset of the project, so we set our timeline for 6 months between the signing of the contract, once the contract was completed, between that and go live. So one of the things that was different right out of the gate is that the Apex team came on site. So they came on site, we dedicated 5 days for the kickoff. And in that 5 days, our stakeholders, we had a conference room booked and we went through it. It's called wireframe mapping, but assume that it's basically every thing that we're asking our suppliers to fill out within the registration. So we're designing the registration and then we're mapping where that information is going to feed and be stored in our ERP and how it will translate. So by being able to dedicate that much time at the front end of the project and building the relationship with the Apex team, our IT was in the room, and then the different stakeholders came in as we got to their piece of the puzzle. We were able to get a significant amount of work done, and the entire framework for all of the coding that needed to take place for both Apex as well as my internal IT. You know, there was a lot of work for my internal IT to do, so it really gave them the ability to have all of those specs and those specifications delivered very quickly. Whereas if we had tried to do it like you do many things, it's a weekly meeting and everybody's half paying attention because they're doing emails as well or instant messages. It's really hard to get to that level of detail without having the dedicated resources in the room. So that got us very far. If we had done those through weekly meetings, it probably would have taken significantly longer to get everything, because we went live with multiple modules at the same time. So we have the registration module, which is by far the most robust of the modules, because as we said, every question or piece of data that we capture in that registration needs to feed in the ERP. So we have to map it to a table in the ERP. So that is a very complex part. But we also have inquiry. So the inquiry module allows our suppliers to self-serve, so they can 24/7 log into our supplier portal once they complete their registration and see their invoices, the status of the invoices, if it was paid, payment detail. They can do a reconciliation, extract it in Excel. So there's a lot of information there. So that's actually a bi-directional feed, because there's data being updated both from our ERP back to the portal and the portal into our ERP. So that there was a lot of coding and development around that, as well as we have the module for dynamic discounting. So that gives our suppliers the ability to manage their own DSO. So if they need to get paid on one or many invoices early, they have the ability through several different methods to select invoices for early payment at a discounted price. So it generates revenue for the organization, but also allows our suppliers to meet their cash on hand needs, which comes in very handy. I can tell you, especially last year in COVID, we had a lot of suppliers that really needed the ability to have that flexibility for their payment terms. So that came in very handy. So those are the modules that we went live with. And so we were doing all of those in parallel. At the end, when we went into testing, we had some resources come out as well and help us meet that aggressive testing deadline, so that if we identified anything when we were in testing, they were agile, and my IT or the Apex IT addressed it immediately and would release the code so we could finish up the testing and meet our go live date. So we did meet our go live date on time. It did not go over. But I will say, like you're saying, as you go through
Congratulations.
Yes, that's
Wait a minute. You just skipped over that like nonchalantly, like, yeah, we did meet our go live date. And it's like, wait a minute. That's like 1 in 100 people meet their go live date, right?
Yes,
I mean,
it was a huge accomplishment. Like I said, that last push at the end, those last 2 weeks, where my IT gave us the resources completely dedicated to all that testing, as well as Apex, having those resources dedicated is how we met that deadline. So they worked with us and were agile so that we could make that final push to hit that deadline, certainly.
I mean that happens so infrequently that when you walk into the CFO's office and you go, hey, congratulations, we met the deadline and we actually delivered the product and our vendor optimization platform is now up and running. I'm pretty sure that the CFO was probably like, yeah, I'm going to call BS on that because nobody ever hits their deadline. But congratulations, that's fantastic. I got to be honest with you. There's probably less than 10% of technology related. There's a number out there. I know Gartner. We could probably just ask the Procurement Foundry now and ask them. Probably like 5 to 10% of projects actually get delivered on time. 2 things I noticed when you were running through this whole thing with me. Number one, the inquiry module that you have to be able to self-serve and go out to your vendor population and ask them. I personally need that for Procurement Foundry with our 5,000 members because their data is constantly. So that's a pain point for me just running a large organization of a membership community, never mind where I used to be back at Publicis Group with 37,000 vendors in a constant battle for, banking information. I don't know how many people's banking information changes on a yearly basis, right? But it seems like everybody. And then the other thing too, that was just a shocking, pleasant surprise to me in this when we did the pre-run through was around dynamic discounting, right? Dynamic discounting is one of those things for me from a procurement perspective. And we talk about this all the time inside of Procurement Foundry around upskilling and getting better at what we do as procurement executives, right? And for me, dynamic discounting actually starts to teach procurement executives and procurement professionals around treasury related optimization and cash flow management, trade working capital, all of those amazing things that aren't necessarily always in our wheelhouse. And for me to be able to see products like this and solutions like this that not only help you keep your vendor solution, your vendor data right, and help your vendors out by onboarding them more intelligently through registration and things like that, but to be able to give dynamic discounting, now all of a sudden you're helping out the treasury guys down the hall, right, Amy?
Absolutely, yes. We've been able to drive a lot of financial gain from the portal. When we get to our KPIs, we'll show you the many ways that we've been able to drive supplier adoption to all of our preferred payment methods, our preferred payment terms, our preferred digital purchase order acknowledgement, invoicing methods.
Yeah.
I know one of the questions you had asked is what are some of the things you learned through the implementation of the portal? The one of the biggest takeaways is that we realized very early on that this tool was not going to just be a registration tool, that this was actually going to be the tool that we were able to drive supplier adoption to all of our procure-to-pay initiatives. It's become our source of truth that we're able to, funnel all of our suppliers through and get them to adopt to the ways that we want to do business. And obviously, one of our large system initiatives was to have a completely digital procure-to-pay work stream. Paper is very timely, it's very expensive, and it also puts us at a tremendous amount of financial risk. As you mentioned with the inquiry module, by people coming through and digitally inquiring, we know we're doing business with the supplier, so the supplier has to log in to access their information. They are the ones updating their information, so there's nobody on my team or one of the other internal teams that is updating information. We also were able to eliminate phishing emails. Before we went live with my team, my team was getting 2 or 3 phishing emails a day. By doing this, we've shut down, so there isn't, people don't have access to my team and their individual emails. They don't know sally@nm.org now. They know to go through the module, they can submit an inquiry. So if they can't self-serve, probably 80% of their questions they can answer themselves. But if for some reason they need to actually speak to one of my team members, that inquiry comes through the module. So when my team is communicating with them, that communication is coming through the portal. So it really secures that conversation. We know we're dealing with one of our suppliers, and they don't have access to the individual. So, we're not opening bad links or anything that compromises our system.
Nice. So I'm gonna kick over to Akhilesh in a minute, but we've got some questions inside of the room. By the way, congratulations. We've had at one point we had over 100 folks in the room, which 100 folks in a room. In an individual room for a webinar for Procurement Foundry. I think that's a new record, only based on last week's record as well. So we're weekly, now week after week, we're setting records here with Procurement Foundry in our webinar live stream. So William Garcia, who has a question, also made a comment. He says, hitting a go live date is a unicorn with glitter on it. Congratulations. So his question is, do you make your suppliers sign a code of conduct? And is that baked into the process?
We do not. We don't have a code of conduct, but we do have terms and conditions.
Right.
That knowledge.
And your terms and conditions is another question down here I'm going to ask in a second. But I'm assuming your terms and conditions are kind of like what I used to call the deal breakers right out of the gate. It's like, listen, if you don't agree to this, don't even bother filling out the registration form, because this is, I work for a very large French company, and well, I love the French because I'm French, but there are a lot of terms and conditions that are deal breakers when you work for a French national conglomerate, right? So if you're wearing the wrong color shirt on certain days, that's a deal breaker. But obviously, you've got to put those things out there at the beginning. It saves a bunch of people a bunch of time and sales cycle on their side. I'm sure some of the vendors are thrilled that you get that out there, right? That's part of your onboarding process, right, as well? I think you mentioned
Correct.
that. Yeah,
correct.
Great.
We lay that out. We also drive that through. A lot of it is rather organic as they're coming through the registration process. We're limiting their options so they can see what we require in the course of business.
So Dave asked a question, how do you deal with suppliers that do not want to align to your standard terms? Since we're on that topic, we'll get Dave's question right out of the way.
So let's think of it in 2 tiers. Let's be completely honest. There's historical suppliers who we've done business with before we had the portal, and then there's brand new suppliers. So brand new suppliers coming through, we require them to come through the whole registration. And to my knowledge, there has not been a supplier that we have done business with in the natural course of business that has not come through the portal, with the exception of, in the height of COVID, there were some burning platforms I'm sure people can relate to, where we had to do business in a way that we had never done business in 150 years. So there were accommodations made to just the critical nature of getting something in immediate. You were going to be outbid if you didn't get it in that moment. So there were some accommodations made around COVID. For our legacy suppliers, it's an ongoing project to have all of our legacy suppliers come through and fill out their registration module and be completely compliant with our new way of doing business. So for them, it is a little bit of both. I'll be honest, if it is a large supplier that could impact patient care, we're going to work with them. If there's something that we have a very large dependency as an organization, there's a middle ground usually to be met. But for the most part, all of our large suppliers have been not only open to the registration, they've been welcoming of it because they want to do business the same way. They want a completely digital procure-to-pay work stream. So the larger suppliers are actually the most compliant, generally speaking.
So I'm going to go off script here for a minute, and I hope you don't mind. So it sounds to me like what you've got going on is your new vendor population, once you deploy the system, it's table stakes. This is what we do. Nobody really is bucking the system a lot. They've agreed to it. The automation is an improvement for them. And because of that, there's not a lot of conflict and a lot of conflict resolution associated with where you want them to be versus where they are, associated with your basic terms and conditions of engagement, right? The older community, obviously you've got a history with them. You've agreed to terms and conditions with them previously, and you've got to find a middle ground associated with how you're going to continue to operate, right? Is this standard operating procedure, Akhilesh, associated with somebody? I mean, you don't deploy this thing into a company that doesn't have vendor. You're rebuilding the airplane as you're flying, right? So is this normal procedure? Is this what you see often?
Yes, this is actually the best practice, Mike, in making sure the portal adoption is the highest level possible, right?
Right.
And by portal adoption, we are just not trying to get a technology to have high usage. Ultimately, it's going to help the business, right? And the procurement team and the vendor master team and so on. Also helps with security because, like Amy mentioned, the phishing emails are gone. She doesn't have to worry about bad links coming into the system and people opening wrong attachments and getting their systems affected with malware. So all of that goes away once we have this level of portal adoption. Now, when a system like this goes live, obviously the first mandate is get all new vendors to go through the portal, as well as all subsequent change requests from coming in from the vendors, like I got to change my address or bank account, or I have a new W-9. All of those changes must be driven through the portal, right?
Yeah.
One more thing, Amy kind of helped enforced in her portal was post go live, other than forcing new vendor setups and changes, she also said, dear supplier, if you need to know the status of your invoice, right? The moment you log into the portal, that's the only way you can get it. And before
we don't give that information out over the phone anymore.
Yeah.
The portal, right?
So, and not only that, but we did not give them access to the inquiry screen right away. We said, you're going to click through the registration first and make sure your information is up to date. And only then you get access to the inquiry screen. So the first time users who logged in, they have no choice but to go through the registration.
Super smart, right? I have this simple rule inside of negotiation strategy, which I learned years ago. You get to give instead of give to get in negotiation, right? So I need to get the information from you to make sure my data is right before I give you where your invoice is at right now. I'm not going to give you it and then ask you to get the information later. It doesn't work that way in negotiation. So really good sequencing there, I think. I want to go back for a minute. There's a question, and questions are starting to fly in. There's a question around, can you elaborate a little bit more on dynamic discounting, which I would love to do, because for me, I'm really geeking out right now on treasury management and vendor V-card payment solutions versus ACH versus checks and wires. Like, is that part of the dynamic payment processing as well? Because only like 3 or 4% of all payment is on V-card right now. There's a huge opportunity in V-card, I think, for procurement to look uber smart in trade working capital management, if you haven't done that yet. And it's not necessarily tied to your P-card system. Your P-card system should be something completely different than this opportunity. But I want to talk about that for a second. The other thing I'm really interested in talking about, maybe we can go back to it before we talk dynamic discounting, is associated with how Amy is handling her vendor population. Amy, huge movement right now inside of supply chain, inside of procurement. around supply diversity and inclusion and equality, right? So
Absolutely.
my question for you would be, we're all hunting for, I think somebody mentioned unicorns before. We're all hunting for diversified ownership, veteran ownership, handicapped ownership organizations to conduct business with as part of our corporate social responsibility programs. Are you running those folks through this same program? What I'm seeing, and I'm interested to hear you on your feedback on this, is we're running them through the same program and asking for the same information, but the terms and conditions of the engagement have to be different because of what we're attempting to achieve there. So maybe the payment terms are a little bit different, or maybe the requirements for liability clause are a little bit different and things like that. Are you developing a program as part of this, and are you seeing that?
So for us, yes, doing business with diversified vendors is a major initiative of the healthcare system.
Yep.
So the healthcare system in a whole, especially around all of our capital projects, our construction projects, renovation, consulting agreements, all of that, there's a major drive in the organization to make sure that we are first considering diversified suppliers. So in order to do that, we had to capture it. That was something that before we had the portal, it was not information that we were gathering, and it wasn't stored in a way that was very queryable, let's say. So
yeah.
Currently what we have is when they come through, we ask specifically if they're a diversified vendor, when they say yes, then we have them fill out what their certification is and the expiration, the dates around their certification.
Yep.
That information is all fed into our ERP, but it's also fully from our database within Apex. We can extract that data and do often because there are different parts of the business. So when they go in to select a vendor, they can see if it's a diversified vendor, certainly, but we have ways to extract it and be able to quantify the spend and the type of, not just that it's a diversified vendor, but the type of service that vendor provides, so that end users can select from that list.
So, Akhilesh, are you seeing that as a best practice now? Are you starting to see people who are like, listen, I need to use your tool, but I need to use it in tranches, if you will, and I don't want to. I spent the weekend on the couch with this voice. I watched The Big Short again, and I learned about tranches again. So are you seeing vendors being put into tranches where, vendor population X is being treated a certain way? Supply diversity and inclusion, I mean, some of those folks, we're actually at the point where we're going out net 120, we're investing in their companies, we're making sure that they've got, access to more data inside of the system so that we can really help them, depending upon how deeply embedded the corporate social responsibility programs are. Is this really starting to, this is going to be bubbling up for you almost in every meeting now?
Yeah, it has definitely trending more these days compared to last few years ago. But we always had supplier diversity as a data point, day one of our portal application. And just like Amy talked about her success, like Amy did not decide to capture diversity just recently, right? She had that vision from day one that diversity is going to be included as part of the registration and the spend reporting and so on and so forth. So similarly, we have many other clients who had this vision from day one about diversity inclusion. But yes, as a best practice, now we care about it a lot more than earlier. And people are asking about it, saying, how can I capture diversity? And some clients who did not opt in to showcase those data points are now asking those questions again, saying, hey, can we get diversity back in? And let's start capturing it. Another trending line is just not your tier one diversity supplier. So obviously you got to know about it and do the spend reporting, but obviously tier two and so on and so forth. So that is also coming up fairly often now.
Yeah, which happens into those, I'm sure it happens in those construction projects, right, Amy? We've got a GC running a construction project and they're running 60, 70 subcontractors. Who are they and what's going on? What's the risk associated with them, right?
Yeah.
So you gotta, it's just, for me, it's one of the biggest topics I'm seeing. What's really interesting to me is, and we just ran a conference on this back in February, supply diversity inclusion as a topic in the United States is literally front and center. Europe is considerably less diluted on that. And when you get into Asia Pac, it's like, what are you guys talking about?
And
so it's really interesting.
And one thing I want to add on diversity is it's also not about just including one new diverse supplier hypothetically and saying, look, I have some spend with them. The true success of diversity in my mind is going to be when we not only onboard that diverse supplier, but over a period of time, we work with them on making their organization scale up, right?
Yeah.
And making those diverse suppliers grow further. That would be the true success of diversity inclusion.
Absolutely 100%. It's not about checking the box and say, okay, I'm sending $10 million with somebody. It's about how do I go from $10 million to $100 million? And then when I get to $100 million with you, what is the downstream impact? What is your hiring practice look like? What are your philanthropic efforts now that you've got $100 million of revenue versus 10? What are you doing philanthropically? Who are you using as suppliers? So it's the impact of the additional spend versus just the additional spend. Right. I think a long time ago, it used to be, hey man, I just got to check a box and get some money in some buckets. And now it's all about the long-term impact of the effects on it. So the question board's lighting up. I want to jump into questions because we've got about 13 minutes left. So let's go back to dynamic discounting for a second. Can we elaborate a little bit more on the options inside of the portal for dynamic discounting? I keep in mind, I got 4 or 5 more questions, so let's try and keep them quick and hits. And by the way, if we don't get to everything, Akhilesh and the team, they're going to have access to this on LinkedIn. We're doing some other things with apexanalytix through Procurement Foundry. I've definitely got them scheduled to come on to Clubhouse. As you all know, we've got a Clubhouse presence. Procurement Foundry now has a Clubhouse club with over 2,000 people in it. That Clubhouse is open to the public and the private buy and sell side. So we mesh those groups together in one room. Unlike our collaboration community, great place for us to continue this conversation in case we don't get to everything. So Akhilesh, tell me a little bit about dynamic discounting inside of the portal and what's the functionality that's there.
Sure. So with dynamic discounting, we often talk about it as a whole cash management, because dynamic discounting allows you to pay early and in essence get a discount from that supplier, and that discount is calculated on a daily basis. So as we get closer to the due date, the discounts will change. So there is a lot of flexibility in portal, meaning you can segment suppliers based on the type of services, country of the suppliers, and so on. So for example, if you have government and utility vendors, you're not going to do dynamic discounting with them. So it starts from the true segmentation. Then you can tailor the APRs and the offers based on those segmentations. And one very interesting fact is it's the ability to take discounts is a feature in portal, right? So if I'm a supplier who's logged in, I can obviously say, pay me early, and I get that discount. But one thing we did very early on within the Apex organization, we went to our own accounts receivable department and we said, hey, what's the best portal out there for dynamic discounting? And they said, there's no such portal. I love my emails. And I love when someone sends me an email and upon clicking on it, I can take a discount, right? So we actually built that feature based on internal feedback of our own AR department. And now what the Northwestern portal also does is it reaches out to the eligible suppliers, showcasing them, here are all your open invoices, click here to get paid early, or click here to always get paid early, right? And we see a huge uptick in subscriptions to get paid early, meaning just pay me early and always take discounts. And that is a huge win for Amy and Northwestern. And the ability to click on that email and get discounts, that's like I can do it on my phone or a tablet and be anywhere, right? So I don't have to be in office on my laptop to make that decision. And lastly, it also includes supply chain financing. So if you have very high spend suppliers where you don't want to use your own money, but you want to use the bank's money, for example, or financial institutions out there, we can enable supply chain financing, which allows the suppliers to get paid early, and you just pay the financial institution at a later date.
Lots of options, it sounds like. That's great
Yeah.
stuff. I'm glad to hear that's going. The only thing that I would ask is, at what point can I pick the cryptocurrency that I can choose to pay my vendors in? And I'm sure it's already on your radar. So
Sure. Yeah, crypto as a payment method. Amy has such a great foresight, Mike, on this, because she had this vision. Yes, the suppliers can enter bank accounts and check payments, etc. But also, what are the other third-party payment methods, right? And
right.
she has some of those in our portal, and I'm sure crypto can be added.
So, yeah, I mean, we and this is bizarre to even say this, but Procurement Foundry, we're starting to grow. We hired a couple new employees. We went out to Apple and we paid for the last two Apple laptops that we bought. We paid in Bitcoin, and it was like, wow, this is just, we're in a whole new planet. Like, this is, I don't even think we're on this planet anymore. We're in a whole new space. So, so anyway, Amy, a couple questions for you really quickly. Hi, Amy. It's from somebody who wants to stay anonymous, by the way. How has the introduction of the supplier portal changed the dynamics, structure, and productivity of the procurement team, ergo P2P and procurement operations?
So obviously I don't manage procurement. So I can't speak to how it's created efficiency for our procurement department specifically. What I can say is for our supplier management team, which I do manage, and the overall procure-to-pay, what I can say is that we've been able to digitize 70% of our transactions. So having them fully digitized, from the purchase order to the acknowledgement, to the invoice, to the payment out to the supplier. So by being able to digitize those, obviously it greatly reduces the FTE burden from having to manage those transactions. It also significantly reduces errors. So our straight through processing rate has increased substantially. And when we say straight through processing, meaning processing all the way through where there's no exception, no match exception with the purchase order. So that eliminates the need for our purchasing team to go in and work those errors that would be holding up payment traditionally to our suppliers. Also, as you can see, here's a couple of KPIs that we could go over. We have 85% of our transaction velocity. Those suppliers are fully registered. 70%, like I said, of our P2P transactions are fully digital. 81% of our vouchers are fully digital because we utilize an e-invoicing solution. So when they come through and register, we require them to sign up for an electronic invoicing solution. 93% of our payments are electronic. We eliminated check as a payment option. We don't want to pay anybody by check. So we have been able to convert all of our payments over to digital, and on top of that, drive adoption to all of our preferred payment programs. So we've grown not only our V-Card program, we have several ACH programs that generate rebate to the organization, as well as dynamic discounting. So our overall revenue has increased through all of those programs. And then
whoa, time out, wait a second. Did you just say you have ACH programs that are creating rebate opportunities back to the organization?
Yes.
All right, we're going to take a whole nother conversation offline about that later on. I want to hear all about, I'm a student of the game, and when I hear something new, I'm all over it. Put a pin in that. You and I personally going to come back. We're going to talk more about that. Go ahead, continue.
Sure. So Akhilesh, if you could go to the next slide, you can see some of the significant results. So with the dynamic discounting, we've increased our annual discounts by 53%. So on top of our static discounts, these dynamic discounts are generating a significant amount of revenue. As far as an FTE reduction, we haven't actually reduced FTEs, but we've grown substantially year over year. We do integrations, and I haven't had to add any headcount to my department because of all of the operating efficiencies from the digitization. I've increased my annual rebates through my card programs, my GHX program, my ePay program by 133%. So between all of those increases and those operating efficiencies, we are a profit center. So we generate more, substantially more than our budget.
Absolute boom. And this is what I'm telling people. This is a perfect marriage between procurement, AP, finance, where you become a profit center, right? It's no longer about, oh, I'm just an operating expense department. Now I'm a profit center. Profit centers, not only reducing costs associated with operations because you don't have to increase, you can increase transactional efficiency. I'm sure there's more to go on this front, even though you've already gone up 133%. But the fact that you're now generating profit as a back office operation, there are very, very few back office operations that can make that statement. Correct?
Yeah, it's been a huge success. Again, a partnership with our Treasury Department, partnership with, procurement, and then of course finance. So it's one of the things that we're very lucky here at Northwestern is that collaboration between departments really shows. So between that collaboration and having a great tool that once again drives supplier adoption and creates a program that works for our suppliers, because with each of these programs in the portal, we don't have to do manual negotiations with them. The negotiations come in of you select this, your payment terms are this, so we can drive that adoption by being able to, they select a payment program that works for them and gives them the payment terms then that make that payment program work for their organization. So we want to make sure that we're not being one-sided in that and that we're giving our suppliers options that work for their organization as well.
Great. I'm sorry, Akhilesh, if you can take that down, I apologize. We're almost out of time. I want to make sure a couple of things. I think we just answered a whole bunch of questions from Patrice and some others there in that spin. If we didn't get to them, I apologize. I highly recommend that you come back in and we'll answer these questions for you inside of Procurement Foundry. And we can get you connected up with Akhilesh, and I'm sure that the team at apexanalytix would be more than happy to answer your questions either through the Procurement Foundry, LinkedIn, or other areas. One of the things I did want to do is I want to make sure that we get a poll up so that I can make sure that if anybody has any more information, I'm going to launch this thing. We still got about 85 or 90 people in the room. So if any of the attendees, please let us know. Do you want to gain more information? Do you need more information from Akhilesh? Do you have questions for Amy on the side? We'd love to talk to you more about this. There's definitely, for me, absolutely no question about it. There is a clubhouse room in our future. I'm just going to make sure that everybody from apexanalytix and Amy and the team, and maybe even some others, have access to Clubhouse. Love to continue this on, which is what's happening with a lot of our webinars right now. Akhilesh, while we're collecting poll data, quick thing, one takeaway. We got 2 minutes left. Just give me 1 minute. If there's one takeaway from all of this discussion today that people need to know from you, what is the key takeaway right now for folks that are sitting out there listening?
And the key takeaway would be create a vision on what your supplier onboarding or suppliers servicing solution looks like, and set a vision to get it done in 6 months' time or within that short time frame, right? Because projects which take a year, 2 years, etc., that's where they don't go live, or they keep missing those milestones, right? So Amy was making sure that we do go live within that 6 month time frame. And one key thing which we have all learned is scope control. So making sure that all the nice to haves can always be a day two, right? But the key focus that we laid down on day one, that goes live first before we take on the bigger steps. So that's one big takeaway from my perspective.
Thank you. Fantastic. Amy, any last thoughts? What's the one takeaway for you, for anybody who's in your role or anybody who's in procurement or sourcing? What have you cut as a key nugget for somebody to take away?
I think it's that your supplier data is really the foundation to your procure-to-pay work stream, and that really being thoughtful on the information you want to gather and how you would utilize it, not just your singular team, but from an organization perspective, it really helps you put together a good registration module that then leads to supplier change up and downstream.
Yep. I'm watching a whole bunch of people answer this poll. I'm going to leave it up for another 15 or 20 seconds. Please get in there and jump in. I've seen 40 or so folks already answer this. So jump in and put your final thoughts on the poll for me. Really appreciate it. Show everybody a bunch of Procurement Foundry love. We really appreciate all of that. I know our membership is very, very interactive and voices their opinion and shows their love for all of this content. Amy, thank you so much for coming and sharing all your information with us today. I know a lot of organizations that aren't as forthcoming, and we really appreciate it. We're always interested in hearing about case studies, success case studies, where this whole thing's going, and how you were able to navigate it, and then to show us those KPIs. Perfect. Thank you so much. Akhilesh, thanks to you and the team over at Apex Analytics. I think you're doing some really special stuff. I am going to get back with you and talk about cryptocurrency some point in the future, buddy, because I want to know where that's going. I think you've got some interesting insights. I just want to know where to place my bets on the giant roulette wheel. Love the fact that that even with all of the success, Amy's only probably deployed about half of what you have in the bag of tricks. So thank you all for your time. Thank you for the almost 100 folks that jumped in today. And thank you so much for giving us insights into how to properly run a vendor program and to upskill it to actually create strategy as opposed to tactics. Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's it for now. We'll be back again in the future. We're going to pump out some of these poll results. I'm sure some folks are going to get some questions answered because we'll do some, Apex will do some follow-up on some answers for you as well. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.